My wife said, "I'm not introducing you to my wealthy friends. You're too embarrassing." I replied, "Understood." Then I showed up to her elite country club as the owner, when she saw me shaking hands with her friends. So there I was, minding my own business in the garage, elbow deep in the guts of a 2015 Silverado that had been making sounds like a dying whale, when my wife Charlotte decided it was the perfect moment to drop a conversational nuke on our marriage. I'm talking about the kind of statement that makes you question every life choice you've made since you were old enough to say, "I do," without really understanding what the hell you were signing up for. She was standing in front of the hallway mirror. You know, the full-length one she insisted we needed because apparently seeing yourself from just the waist up isn't enough validation for some people. And she was doing that thing where she tilts her head at different angles like she's trying to find her good side for an invisible camera crew. Charlotte's 30 years old, blonde in that expensive way where you know she's dropping $200 every 6 weeks at some salon with a French name. And she's got this whole polished look going on like she stepped out of a catalog for women who brunch professionally. Now, I should mention that I'm Danny Pierce, also 30, and I'm what you might call aggressively average looking. I've got the kind of face that people describe as friendly, which is code for not ugly enough to be memorable. I'm a mechanic, which means my hands are perpetually stained with motor oil that no amount of that orange industrial soap can fully remove. And I've got this collection of t-shirts with holes in them that Charlotte has been threatening to throw away for the past 3 years. But they're comfortable, you know? And since when did functionality take a backseat to fashion? Oh right, since I married Charlotte. Anyway, she's posing in the mirror wearing this dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. And she just casually drops this gem without even looking at me. "I'm not introducing you to my wealthy friends. You're too embarrassing." Just like that. No warning. No, honey, we need to talk. No gentle lead-in. Just straight-up verbal assassination while I'm holding a 3/4-inch wrench and trying to figure out why this truck sounds like it's gargling marbles. I froze. Actually froze like someone had hit the pause button on my entire existence. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard her. Maybe she said, "You're too encouraging," or "You're too disparaging," or literally anything else that wouldn't make me want to use this wrench for purposes the manufacturer definitely didn't intend. But no, I heard her correctly, and she was still standing there admiring herself like she'd just delivered the world's most reasonable statement instead of basically telling her husband that he's not good enough to breathe the same air as her country club cronies. Embarrassing? I finally managed to say, still clutching that wrench like it was some kind of security blanket. "Lady, I once unclogged a diesel engine using duct tape and a prayer. That's talent." And I wasn't even exaggerating. It was a 2008 Duramax that everyone else had given up on, and I got that beast purring like a kitten using nothing but ingenuity and the kind of stubborn determination that my dad always said would either make me successful or get me killed. Jury's still out on which one, honestly. But here's the thing about being married to someone like Charlotte, someone who measures human worth in dollar signs and Instagram followers. Arguing is pointless. It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a golden retriever. They're going to look at you with those blank eyes, tilt their head, and then go right back to whatever they were doing before you interrupted their day with silly things like logic or basic human decency. So instead of launching into the speech I'd been mentally preparing for the past 30 seconds about how I'm actually a pretty decent guy who works hard and doesn't cheat on his taxes or his wife. Well, didn't cheat on his wife. Past tense seems more appropriate now. I just looked at her and said, "Understood." One word. That's all she got from me. Understood. Which, if you're fluent in husband language, actually translates to approximately 17 different things including, but not limited to. You just revealed exactly who you are, and I'm filing that information away for future reference. This marriage is definitely going to be a topic in therapy someday. And my personal favorite, you just played yourself so hard that I don't even need to do anything except sit back and watch the inevitable implosion. Charlotte didn't even notice the weight of that single word. She just gave me this satisfied little smile like I'd finally agreed to something she'd been asking for, grabbed her designer purse, the one with the interlocking C's that cost more than my truck payment, and headed out the door for wherever it is she goes when she's avoiding me. Which, to be fair, is pretty much everywhere lately. The country club, her business meetings that always seem to involve bottomless mimosas, her mother's house where they probably sit around discussing what a disappointment I am while eating finger sandwiches with the crusts cut off. I stood there in the garage for a solid 5 minutes after she left, just holding that wrench and staring at the oil stain on the concrete floor that kind of looked like Abraham Lincoln if you squinted and had recently suffered a head injury. The Silverado was still making that awful noise, but suddenly I couldn't care less about fixing it. My hands were shaking a little bit, which pissed me off because I don't shake. I'm not that guy. I'm the guy who stays calm when engines explode and customers scream and life throws curveballs. But something about the casual cruelty in Charlotte's voice, the way she delivered that statement like she was commenting on the weather instead of crushing whatever was left of our relationship, it got to me. The really messed up part? This wasn't even the first time she'd said something like this. It was just the first time she'd been quite so direct about it. Usually, it was subtle digs about my clothes or my truck or the fact that I preferred watching football at home instead of attending her insufferable social events where everyone talks about their portfolios and their vacation homes like they're curing cancer instead of just hoarding money. She'd make little comments about how I didn't fit in with her friends, how I didn't understand their lifestyle, how maybe I should try harder to be the kind of man she could show off instead of hide. But you know what? I didn't want to try harder. I liked who I was. I liked fixing things, getting my hands dirty, solving problems that actually mattered instead of debating which shade of beige looked better on accent walls. I liked being the guy people called at 2 in the morning when their car died on the highway, the guy who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it, the guy who'd rather spend a Saturday afternoon in the garage than playing golf with a bunch of dudes who measured their masculinity by their handicap scores. And that's when it hit me, standing there in my garage surrounded by tools and truck parts and the smell of motor oil that had become more familiar than my own wife's perfume. Charlotte didn't want a husband. She wanted an accessory, a trophy, something impressive she could parade around at her fancy events to prove that she'd made it, whatever it meant in her shallow little world. The fact that I was a real person with thoughts and feelings and my own definition of success didn't matter to her. What mattered was how I looked on paper, how I photographed at events, whether I could help her climb whatever imaginary social ladder she was so desperately trying to ascend. Understood, I said again to the empty garage, and this time I smiled. Because Charlotte had no idea what was coming. No idea at all. Here's the thing about Charlotte that made this whole situation absolutely hilarious in that dark, ironic way that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. She had no clue. Like, zero clue. Absolutely none. We're talking about a woman who prided herself on knowing everyone's business, who spent hours stalking people on social media to figure out their net worth, who could smell money from 3 zip codes away. And yet she'd been sleeping next to a gold mine for 3 years without ever bothering to dig beneath the surface. It would be impressive if it wasn't so pathetically predictable. The fancy country club she worshipped like it was Disneyland for rich people, the one where she spent every Saturday afternoon pretending to play tennis while actually just gossiping and drinking wine that cost more per glass than most people spend on groceries. The one she talked about constantly like it was the most exclusive, prestigious establishment this side of Buckingham Palace? Yeah, that one. I owned it. Well, technically I co-owned it, but let's not split hairs here. The point is, every time Charlotte strutted through those doors acting like she was gracing the place with her presence, she was actually walking into a building that belonged to her embarrassing mechanic husband. And before you start thinking I'm some kind of trust fund baby who got lucky in the genetic lottery, let me set the record straight. This wasn't about me winning the Powerball or inheriting money from some distant relative I'd never met. My father, Raymond Pierce, built that country club from absolutely nothing. We're talking about a guy who started with a dream, a bank loan that would make most people's eyes water, and the kind of work ethic that modern society has apparently decided is optional. He wasn't born with money. He wasn't connected to the right people. He was just a guy who saw an opportunity in this town and decided to take it. Consequences be damned. I remember being a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, watching my dad pour concrete for the foundation of what would eventually become the Crown Ridge Country Club. He was out there in the blazing sun, shirt soaked through with sweat, hands raw and bleeding from the work, and he had this look on his face like he was building a cathedral instead of a glorified playground for people with more money than sense. My mom used to bring him lunch every day, and I'd tag along, and he'd sit there eating his sandwich while telling me about his vision for the place. The golf course, the tennis courts, the ballroom, the restaurant. He had it all mapped out in his head years before any of it actually existed. It took him 15 years to build Crown Ridge into what it is today. 15 years of 18-hour days, of sacrificing family dinners and vacations, and every other normal thing that normal people do, because he was obsessed with creating something that would last. Something he could pass down to his kids. Something that would mean we'd never have to struggle the way he did growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 siblings and parents who worked 3 jobs between them just to keep the lights on. When he died 4 years ago, sudden heart attack at 62, which is way too young and completely unfair, but that's life for you. He left the club to me and my sister, Sophia. And Sophia, bless her type A, control-freak heart, was more than happy to take over the day-to-day operations. She lives for that stuff. Budgets, staffing issues, member complaints, event planning. It's like her idea of a good time. She's got spreadsheets for her spreadsheets. She color-codes her calendar. She once made a PowerPoint presentation about the optimal thread count for the club's linens. I'm not even kidding. 47 slides. I fell asleep during slide 12, which was about Egyptian cotton versus Supama cotton, and when I woke up, she was still going strong. Me? I just sign the papers when Sophia shoves them in front of me. Show up for the quarterly board meetings where I spend most of the time trying not to fall asleep or say something that'll get me in trouble, and cash the checks that get deposited into my account twice a month. It's a sweet deal, honestly. I get to maintain my identity as a mechanic, which is what I actually love doing, while also having a financial cushion that most mechanics don't get to enjoy. Best of both worlds, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Why didn't I tell Charlotte about any of this? Why didn't I brag about owning one of the most exclusive country clubs in the state? Why didn't I whip out my bank statements and shove them in her face every time she made some snide comment about my career choices or my lack of ambition or whatever other criticism she felt like lobbing at me that day? Simple. I like fixing trucks more than sipping wine I can't pronounce. I know that sounds like some kind of humble brag, pretentious statement, but it's the truth. There's something incredibly satisfying about taking something that's broken and making it work again. About diagnosing a problem that 3 other mechanics couldn't figure out. About getting your hands dirty and actually producing something tangible at the end of the day instead of just shuffling papers or attending meetings or doing whatever it is that people in fancy offices do to justify their existence. Plus, and this is the part that's probably going to make me sound naive or stupid or both, I wanted someone to love me for me. Not for my last name. Not for my bank account. Not because I could technically charge her friends rent to use the facilities they thought made them special. Just me. Danny Pierce, the guy who can rebuild a transmission blindfolded and makes pretty decent scrambled eggs and laughs too loud at his own jokes, and has a collection of vintage concert t-shirts that he refuses to throw away no matter how many holes they accumulate. When I met Charlotte at that charity car wash 3 years ago, organized by the club, ironically, though I was there as a volunteer mechanic, not as an owner, I introduced myself as Danny the mechanic. She seemed charmed by the whole working class thing. She told her friends I was refreshingly down-to-earth, and so different from the guys she usually dated, which I now realize was code for, he's a fun little experiment before I settle down with someone actually worth my time. She played the part of the girl who didn't care about money, who valued authenticity and hard work and all those other things that sound great on paper, but apparently don't hold up in real life when your friends are judging you for marrying beneath your social class. I proposed after 6 months because I'm an idiot who thought we had something real. She said yes because, well, I'm still not entirely sure why she said yes, to be honest. Maybe she thought she could change me. Maybe she liked the idea of being different from her friends. Maybe she was going through something, and I was convenient. Whatever the reason, we got married at a small ceremony that she complained about for months afterward because apparently 75 people isn't enough witnesses to prove your love is legitimate. The whole time we were dating and engaged and then married, I kept thinking I'd tell her about Crown Ridge. I'd plan out the conversation in my head. Hey, babe, funny story about that country club you love so much. But the timing never felt right. And then the longer I waited, the weirder it got. How do you casually drop that information after 2 years of marriage? Oh, by the way, honey, remember how you've been treating me like I'm not good enough for your social circle? Well, plot twist. I'm actually way richer than most of them, and I've been playing poor this whole time. It sounds insane. Because it is insane. But here's what really stopped me from telling her. I started to notice things. Little things at first. The way she'd correct my grammar in front of her friends. How she'd forget to invite me to events at the club. The comments about my truck, my clothes, my job, my lack of sophistication. She was embarrassed by me. Genuinely, truly embarrassed. And every time I thought about revealing the truth, I'd remember that look on her face when I showed up somewhere in my work clothes, that mixture of disappointment and shame, and I'd think, why should I give her this satisfaction? Because that's what it would be, right? Satisfaction. She'd suddenly be proud of me, but not because I'd changed or grown or done anything different. She'd be proud because the numbers in my bank account met her approval. Her friends would suddenly find me fascinating. Her mother would stop making passive-aggressive comments about my potential. Everyone would act like I was a completely different person, when in reality, the only thing that had changed was their awareness of my financial situation. Spoiler alert, mission failed. The whole find someone who loves you for you experiment crashed and burned harder than a '98 Civic with a cracked engine block. Charlotte didn't love me for me. She tolerated me despite me, and even that tolerance was wearing thin. 3 years of marriage, and she still introduced me to new people as my husband. He's a mechanic, in that tone that somehow made an honest profession sound like a communicable disease. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every time Charlotte walked into Crown Ridge, every time she charged mimosas and Caesar salads to her member account, every time she complained to the staff about something not being up to her standards, she had no idea that her embarrassing husband was technically her boss. That those same staff members she talked down to, they knew exactly who I was. Gerald, the general manager, had been working for my dad since the club opened. Maria at the front desk had watched me grow up. The entire kitchen staff knew me by name because I'd spent countless hours back there as a teenager, washing dishes and learning to cook from Chef Antoine, who still made my favorite lasagna whenever I stopped by. They all knew. Everyone at that club knew that Danny Pierce, the owner's son, the co-owner of the entire establishment, was married to Charlotte Westfield Pierce, the woman who treated them like servants and complained when her water wasn't the right temperature. And they all kept my secret because that's what loyalty looks like. They understood, without me ever having to explain it, that I was conducting some kind of weird social experiment. They watched Charlotte parade around like she owned the place, and then they'd catch my eye, and we'd share this moment of mutual understanding that was way more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. My sister Sophia thought I was insane. Just tell her, she'd say every time Charlotte did something particularly obnoxious. Put her in her place. Let her know who she married. But I couldn't, or wouldn't. Maybe I was waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe I was punishing myself for making such a terrible choice. Maybe I just wanted to see how long it would take for her to figure it out on her own, which apparently was going to be never because Charlotte was many things, but observant wasn't one of them. So there I was, living this double life. Danny the mechanic who came home with oil under his fingernails and grease on his jeans. And Danny Pierce, co-owner of Crown Ridge Country Club, with more money sitting in investments and bank accounts than Charlotte spent on her entire wardrobe. Two versions of the same person, and Charlotte only knew the one she'd decided wasn't good enough for her. But after that conversation in front of the mirror, after that casual declaration that I was too embarrassing to introduce to her wealthy friends, something shifted. I was done waiting for the perfect moment. I was done protecting her from the truth. I was done letting her think she was better than me. It was time for Charlotte to meet the other Danny Pierce. And I had a feeling she wasn't going to like him very much. Saturday night rolled around like it always did, which meant Charlotte was in full preparation mode for her weekly pilgrimage to Crown Ridge. I'm talking about a 3-hour transformation process that involved more products than a CVS cosmetics aisle and enough mirror time to make Narcissus look like he had healthy self-esteem. She'd been in the bathroom since 4 o'clock, and it was now past 7, which meant she was right on schedule for her usual grand entrance at the club around 8:30. Fashionably late, she called it. Annoying as hell, I called it, but nobody asked for my opinion. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch some documentary about sharks or submarines or something else that involved water and danger, when she finally emerged from the bedroom looking like she'd been professionally assembled by a team of stylists. She was wearing this dress, this ridiculous, gorgeous, probably cost more than my truck payment dress in some shade of blue that I'm supposed to call cerulean or azure, or whatever fancy name rich people give to colors that us regular folks just call blue. It had this whole situation going on with the neckline and the back and all these other architectural elements that I didn't understand, but apparently required a specific type of bra that cost $200. I know this because I saw the credit card statement last month and nearly choked on my coffee. "Don't wait up," she said, checking her reflection in that damn hallway mirror one more time. Adjusting an earring that looked perfectly fine to me, but apparently was 1 millimeter off from where it needed to be to achieve maximum elegance, or whatever. She didn't kiss me goodbye, didn't ask if I wanted to come, didn't even really look at me, just grabbed her clutch, a tiny little purse thing that couldn't possibly hold anything useful like a phone or keys, or literally anything that matters, and headed for the door. "Have fun," I said, which was husband code for, "I hope you step in something unpleasant, but not so unpleasant that I'll feel bad about it later." She left in her BMW, the one I'd co-signed for because apparently her credit wasn't as good as she pretended it was. And I sat there for exactly 45 seconds before I made a decision that was either going to be the most brilliant move of my life or the thing that finally pushed our marriage off the cliff it had been teetering on for the past year. I was going to Crown Ridge, not as Charlotte's embarrassing mechanic husband who wasn't good enough to breathe the same air as her wealthy friends. No, I was going as Danny Pierce, co-owner of the entire establishment, and I was going to do it in style. Or at least, my version of style, which Charlotte would definitely not approve of, which made it even better. I changed out of my comfortable home clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I void warranties," which I thought was hilarious, but Charlotte thought was juvenile, and put on a pair of jeans. Not fancy jeans. Not designer jeans with some Italian names stitched on the back pocket. Just regular Levi's that I'd bought at Target and had worn enough times that they were properly broken in and comfortable. Then I threw on a button-down shirt that was technically nice enough for the club's dress code, but had definitely seen better days. The collar was a little frayed, and there was a tiny oil stain near the bottom that I'd never quite managed to get out, but whatever. It was clean mostly. Then came the best part. I grabbed my keys to the F-250. My beautiful, rusty, completely impractical, gas-guzzling, definitely not appropriate for a country club Ford F-250 that Charlotte hated with a passion that most people reserve for their worst enemies or the IRS. She'd been begging me to get rid of it for 2 years, saying it ruined her aesthetic, which is possibly the most Charlotte sentence that has ever been spoken in the history of human language. The truck was a 2003 model with 180,000 miles on it. A dent in the passenger door from when I'd backed into a pole. In my defense, the pole came out of nowhere, in a color that the manufacturer probably called silver metallic, but that time and weather had faded into something closer to indeterminate gray. I loved that truck more than I'd loved anything in recent memory, possibly including my wife, which probably said something about the state of my marriage, but I wasn't ready to unpack that particular piece of psychological baggage just yet. The drive to Crown Ridge took about 20 minutes, which gave me plenty of time to question my sanity and talk myself out of what I was about to do approximately 17 times. But every time I thought about turning around, I'd remember Charlotte standing in front of that mirror telling me I was too embarrassing to introduce to her friends, and my foot would press a little harder on the gas pedal. This wasn't about revenge, exactly. Or maybe it was totally about revenge. I'm not a therapist, I don't know. All I knew was that I was done hiding who I was to make Charlotte comfortable. I pulled up to the club's main entrance at exactly 8:45, which meant Charlotte had probably been inside for about 15 minutes. Long enough to get settled with her friends, order her first glass of whatever overpriced wine they were pushing this week, and start talking about whatever it is that wealthy women talk about when they get together. Probably something about real estate or their interior designers, or how hard it is to find good help these days, which always made me want to throw something, because Charlotte couldn't even load a dishwasher properly. But sure, finding good help was her biggest struggle. The valet parking attendant, a college kid named Marcus who I'd known since he was 16 and started working at the club, saw my truck coming and his eyes went wide. Like, comically wide. Like cartoon character who just saw a ghost wide. He practically sprinted to the driver's side door before I'd even come to a complete stop, which was definitely not standard operating procedure for a rusty F-250 that looked like it had been through a war. "Mr. Pierce," he said, yanking my door open like he was greeting royalty. "Sir, we weren't expecting you tonight." Does Miss Sophia know you're here? Nope, I said, climbing out of the truck and handing him the keys. And let's keep it that way for a bit, yeah? I want to surprise someone. Marcus grinned like I'd just let him in on the world's best secret. Your wife's already inside, sir. She came in about 15 minutes ago. I know, I said. That's kind of the point. I slipped him a 20, which was way more than necessary for parking a truck, but Marcus was a good kid working his way through community college, and I remembered what that was like, and headed toward the entrance. The building looked exactly like it always did, all stately and impressive with its stone facade and perfectly manicured landscaping and lighting that made everything look like it belonged in a magazine spread about how the other half lives. My dad had been so proud of this place. He used to stand right where I was standing and just look at it, this expression on his face like he couldn't quite believe he'd built something so permanent, so real. I miss him like crazy, especially at moments like this when I'm about to do something that's either really brave or really stupid and could really use some fatherly advice about which category it falls into. The front doors were these massive wooden things that probably weighed more than my truck, but they swung open smoothly because my dad had insisted on the best hinges money could buy. Details matter, Danny, he used to say. People might not notice when things work perfectly, but they sure as hell notice when they don't. The lobby was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers that got replaced every single day whether they needed it or not, because apparently wilted flowers are a sign of societal collapse or something. There were probably 30 people milling around, members heading to dinner, couples dressed up for the Saturday night social event that happened in the ballroom, staff moving efficiently from place to place making sure everything ran smoothly. And there, standing behind the concierge desk looking distinguished in his perfectly tailored suit, was Gerald Morrison, the general manager who'd been working at Crown Ridge since before I was born. Gerald was one of those guys who aged gracefully into his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that made you want to stand up straighter just from being near him. He'd taught me how to tie a Windsor knot when I was 14. He'd given me advice about girls when I was 16. He'd been a pallbearer at my dad's funeral. When Gerald saw me walk through those doors, his entire face lit up like I'd just told him he won the lottery. He came around from behind the desk faster than I thought a 62-year-old man could move, his hand extended for a handshake that turned into one of those half-hug things that men do when they're too emotionally repressed to commit to a full hug, but still want to express affection. Mr. Pierce, he said, loud enough that several nearby members turned to look. What an honor to have you join us this evening. We weren't expecting you, sir. Is everything all right? Does Miss Sophia know you're here? Why does everyone keep asking if Sophia knows I'm here? I asked, grinning. I'm a co-owner, Gerald. I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to show up unannounced at my own club. Of course, sir, of course, Gerald said. But he was smiling in this way that told me he knew exactly what I was up to. Or at least, he suspected. Gerald hadn't survived 30 years in the hospitality industry by being oblivious to drama. Will you be dining with us this evening? I can arrange for your usual table. Actually, I said, looking past him toward the hallway that led to the main dining room and the bar area where Charlotte was almost certainly holding court with her friends. I think I'll just wander around a bit. Maybe surprise my wife. You know how she loves surprises. Gerald's smile got wider, which confirmed my suspicion that he knew exactly what was happening here. Of course, Mr. Pierce. Please let me know if you need anything at all. Anything. He emphasized that last anything in a way that made it clear he was Team Danny in whatever was about to go down, which felt pretty good, honestly. It's nice to know that someone's in your corner, even if that someone is technically your employee and probably shouldn't be taking sides in marital disputes, but whatever, I'd take what I could get. I straightened my collar, the frayed one on my definitely not fancy enough shirt, and headed toward the bar. My heart was pounding in a way that reminded me of the time I'd accidentally grabbed a live wire while working on a truck and gotten shocked hard enough to see stars. This was either going to be the most satisfying moment of my life or the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. Honestly, at this point, I was good with either outcome. Walking through Crown Ridge Country Club when you actually own the place, but nobody knows you own the place, is a weird experience that I can't fully explain, but I'll try anyway. It's like being a ghost at your own funeral. You get to see how people really act when they think you're not watching. Except in this case, people thought I was just some random mechanic who definitely shouldn't be there. I could feel the looks as I walked down the hallway toward the main social areas. Not hostile looks, exactly, but definitely confused ones. Like, is that guy lost? Did someone's contractor accidentally wander in? Should we alert security? The hallway was lined with photographs documenting the club's history, groundbreaking ceremonies, grand opening shots, tournament winners, charity events, all of it preserved behind expensive frames with little brass plaques underneath. About halfway down, there was a photo of my dad from the opening day in 1995, standing in front of the main entrance with this massive grin on his face and a shovel in his hands. I stopped for a second to look at it, like I always did when I was here. He looked so young in that picture, so full of hope and pride and determination. He had no idea that 30 years later, his son would be using his legacy as a weapon in a failing marriage. Sorry, Dad. I'm doing my best here. The main social area of Crown Ridge was basically designed to make rich people feel even richer than they already were. We're talking about a space that could have housed a small village, with ceilings so high you could have played basketball in there if anyone at a country club actually did anything as pedestrian as play basketball. There were multiple seating areas with furniture that cost more than cars, a bar that stretched along one entire wall with shelves of alcohol that probably totaled more than most people's annual salaries, and enough chandeliers to light up a small city. The whole place had this old money elegance thing going on that my dad had insisted on: dark wood, leather, brass fixtures, the kind of timeless design that never goes out of style because it was never really in style. It just was. Saturday night at Crown Ridge was always packed. This was when the members came out to see and be seen, to network and gossip and show off their latest purchases, whether that was jewelry or cars or mistresses. I don't know. Rich people are weird. The dress code was strictly enforced. Jackets required for men. No jeans except apparently for the co-owner, who could wear whatever the hell he wanted, but hadn't exercised that privilege until tonight. There were probably 200 people scattered throughout the space, clustered in groups, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny, drinking drinks that definitely cost too much. And then I heard it. That voice. That booming, impossible to ignore, used to selling things to people who don't need them voice that could only belong to one person. Danny Pierce. You magnificent son of a bitch. Where the hell have you been hiding? Richard Lawson came at me like a freight train in a custom suit. Richard was my dad's old business partner, the guy who'd helped secure the initial financing for Crown Ridge back when every bank in 3 counties had told my dad he was insane. He was in his late 60s now, semi-retired, but still involved in about 40 different business ventures because men like Richard don't know how to actually retire. They just pretend to while still working 60-hour weeks. He was tall, silver-haired, had one of those faces that looked trustworthy even when he was probably screwing you over in a business deal, and he was currently bearing down on me with his arms spread wide like he was about to tackle me. Before I could say anything, before I could prepare myself or think about the implications or remember that my wife was somewhere in this building, and this was about to get very complicated very fast, Richard had wrapped me in a hug that knocked the air out of my lungs. The man might have been pushing 70, but he still hit the gym 5 days a week, and it showed. Richard, I managed to gasp out. Good to see you too, man. Can't breathe, though. Need oxygen. Kind of important for living. He released me, but kept his hands on my shoulders, holding me at arm's length and looking at me like a proud parent examining their kid after a long absence. 3 months, Danny. 3 months since you've shown your face around here. Your sister's been running this place single-handedly and doing a damn good job of it, I might add, but still. You're a co-owner. You should be here more often. I've been busy, I said, which was true. I'd been busy fixing trucks and avoiding my wife and generally pretending that my life wasn't falling apart, but Richard didn't need to know all that. Busy, Richard repeated, like the word was foreign to him. You sound like your father. Raymond was always too busy actually working to enjoy what he'd built. Don't make the same mistake, son. Then his expression shifted into something more mischievous, and I knew I was in trouble. Come on, there are people here who'll want to see you. You remember the Hendersons? And Margaret Chin? And oh, the Kowalskis are here tonight. They ask about you every time I see them. Richard, I don't think. I started, but it was too late. Richard Lawson was a man on a mission, and that mission apparently involved parading me around Crown Ridge like I was the guest of honor at a party I hadn't agreed to attend. He grabbed my arm and started pulling me deeper into the social area, toward the clusters of well-dressed people who were now turning to see what the commotion was about. And Richard, bless his completely unsubtle heart, decided that a quiet reunion wasn't good enough. No, he needed to make an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room in that way that suggested he'd missed his calling as a carnival barker or auctioneer. "The co-owner of Crown Ridge Country Club is here. Danny Pierce, everybody. I wanted to die. Actually die. Just melt into the floor and cease to exist as a physical being. Because every single person in that room turned to look at me, and I could see the gears turning in their heads as they tried to reconcile what Richard had just said with what they were actually seeing. A co-owner? This guy? In jeans and a frayed collar? What alternate universe had they stumbled into? But then something magical happened. Recognition. Because most of these people, or at least a good portion of them, had known my dad, had done business with him, had attended his funeral, and told me how sorry they were for my loss and how much Raymond Pierce had meant to this community. They remembered that Raymond had kids. They just hadn't connected the dots that one of those kids was the guy who occasionally showed up to fix broken golf carts or help out in the kitchen or do any of the other random maintenance tasks I'd been doing around the club for years because I liked feeling useful, and definitely not because I was co-owner of the place. The first person to reach me was Margaret Shun, a tiny woman in her 70s who'd made her fortune in real estate and spent it on designer handbags and spoiling her grandchildren. She had to stand on her tiptoes to kiss my cheek. "Danny Pierce, you've been holding out on us. How long has it been since you've attended one of our social events?" "Too long, Mrs. Chun," I said, because it was true and also because my mother had raised me to be polite to my elders even when my entire world was about to implode. Then came the Hendersons, Mike and Susan, both in their 50s, both looking like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog with their matching golf tans and perfectly coordinated outfits. Mike pumped my hand so hard I thought my shoulder might dislocate. "Your father would be so proud to see you here, son. This place was his dream, and look at it now. Still going strong." "Thanks, Mike," I said, trying not to think about how my dad would actually react to me using his life's work as a prop in my marital drama. Probably not great, honestly. More people crowded around. The Kowalskis, the Pattersons, the Wongs, all these people who'd known my family for decades and were suddenly treating me like visiting royalty instead of the guy they'd probably seen changing kegs in the back room or unclogging toilets in the men's locker room. Every handshake felt weighted with significance. Every conversation had this undercurrent of respect that I wasn't used to and definitely didn't know how to handle. These were the same people who'd probably walked past me 100 times without really seeing me. And now they were hanging on my every word because Richard Lawson had announced my title. It was surreal. It was uncomfortable. It was absolutely, perfectly, exactly what I needed to happen. Because somewhere in this room was Charlotte, my wife, the woman who'd told me I was too embarrassing to introduce to her wealthy friends. And unless she'd suddenly gone deaf or developed the ability to teleport, she'd definitely heard Richard's announcement. She knew I was here, and she was about to have a very, very bad night. I kept one eye on the crowd forming around me and one eye scanning the room, looking for that specific shade of blue dress, that particular way she held herself like she was posing for an invisible camera. And then I found her. Or rather, I saw her boss first, Marlene Fairchild, a woman in her late 40s who ran some kind of marketing consultancy and treated her employees like they should be grateful just to exist in her presence. Charlotte worked for Marlene doing social media management or brand consulting, or one of those jobs that sounds made up but apparently pays well enough to afford $900 dresses. Marlene was holding court near the bar with a group of other women who all had that same perfectly maintained, expensively dressed, definitely had personal trainers look about them. They were the queen bees of Crown Ridge, the women who set the social calendar and decided who was in and who was out, and generally acted like high school never ended. It just got more expensive. And there, right in the center of that group, was Charlotte, my wife, standing there with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something one of the other women had said. She looked beautiful, which annoyed me. It would have been easier if she'd looked mean or ugly or somehow obviously villainous. But no, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, which made everything more complicated. Our eyes met across the room. I watched in real time as her brain processed what she was seeing. First confusion, what was I doing here? Then concern, Why was Richard Lawson hugging me? Then horror, pure, absolute, soul-crushing horror, as she realized what must have just been announced, what all these people were now treating me like, what this meant about everything she thought she knew about her embarrassing mechanic husband. She froze. Actually froze mid-sip, like someone had hit pause on her entire existence. The wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Her smile dissolved into something that wasn't quite an expression, more like the absence of expression. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Vindication. Richard was still talking, something about quarterly earnings and membership renewals, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching Charlotte, watching her try to process this information, watching her realize that every conversation we'd ever had, every assumption she'd made, every condescending comment about my career and my potential and my worth as a human being, all of it had been based on incomplete information. Richard, I said, interrupting whatever he'd been saying about renovations or golf tournaments or whatever, I need to go say hi to my wife. She's right over there, and I think she might be surprised to see me. Richard followed my gaze to where Charlotte stood frozen like a department store mannequin who'd suddenly gained sentience and immediately regretted it. His grin got wider because Richard hadn't survived 40 years in business without learning how to recognize drama when he saw it brewing. Well then, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Let's not keep her waiting. I've been meaning to meet Charlotte properly anyway. She works for Marlene, doesn't she? Excellent. I've been meaning to talk to Marlene about sponsoring our charity golf tournament. And just like that, with Richard Lawson as my wingman and about 50 wealthy witnesses watching with interest, I headed toward my wife and her circle of friends to deliver the news that would either save or end my marriage. Honestly, I still wasn't sure which outcome I was hoping for. Walking across that room toward Charlotte felt like one of those dreams where you're moving in slow motion and everyone's watching you, and you're either completely naked or about to give a speech in a language you don't speak. Except this was real life, and I was fully clothed in my jeans and frayed collar, and the speech I was about to give was going to be delivered in the universal language of, I told you I was a mechanic. I just forgot to mention the part where I'm also rich. Richard was still next to me, completely oblivious to the psychological warfare that was about to unfold, chatting about something related to the club's wine selection or maybe the weather. I honestly couldn't tell you because my brain was operating on about 17 different levels of anxiety and anticipation simultaneously. Every step closer to Charlotte's group felt like walking toward either my execution or my liberation, and I genuinely didn't know which one it was going to be. Charlotte still hadn't moved. She was standing there like someone had replaced her with a wax statue, except wax statues don't usually look like they're having an existential crisis in real time. Her friends hadn't noticed yet. They were too busy with their own conversations, their own drinks, their own little worlds where the biggest problem was probably deciding between the sea bass or the filet mignon. But Marlene, Charlotte's boss, had noticed Richard approaching. Of course she had. Marlene Fairchild didn't miss anything that might benefit her professionally, and Richard Lawson was exactly the kind of connection she'd been trying to make for years. Richard, Marlene said, her voice hitting that perfect pitch of friendly but professional that people use when they're networking but pretending they're not. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my truck was worth, with jewelry that definitely did, and she had this whole power woman thing going on that I'm sure impressed a lot of people, but mostly just made me tired. What a pleasant surprise. We were just discussing the upcoming fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. Marlene, wonderful to see you as always, Richard said, shaking her hand with that firm but not aggressive grip that business people spend years perfecting. I actually wanted to introduce you to someone. This is Danny Pierce, co-owner of Crown Ridge and Raymond Pierce's son. The effect of those words on Marlene's face was like watching someone get hit with a cartoon mallet. Her eyes went wide, her smile froze in place, and I could practically see the calculations happening behind her eyes as she tried to figure out how she'd missed this particular piece of information. See, Marlene prided herself on knowing everyone and everything. She had files, actual files, on every important person in this town, because that's how she operated. Knowledge was power, and power was how you got ahead in her world. The fact that Charlotte's husband, the mechanic she'd heard about, the one Charlotte occasionally complained about during lunch breaks, was actually a co-owner of the most exclusive country club in the state? That was a massive intelligence failure on Marlene's part. Danny Pierce, she repeated, taking my hand like she was afraid it might bite her. I had no idea. Charlotte never mentioned. She stopped herself, realizing that finishing that sentence would basically be admitting that her employee had somehow failed to mention a rather significant detail about her personal life. Yeah, Charlotte and I like to keep things low-key, I said, which was technically true if you defined low-key as one person deliberately withholding information while the other person remains blissfully ignorant of their spouse's entire financial situation. I'm not really the country club type, if you know what I mean. I prefer working with my hands, fixing things, staying out of the spotlight. I turned to look at Charlotte, who had finally managed to unfreeze herself enough to set down her wine glass before she dropped it. She was staring at me like I'd just announced I was actually an alien from another planet who'd been studying human behavior for the past 3 years. Which, honestly, would have probably been easier for her to process than the truth. "Hi, honey," I said, and I swear to God I kept my voice as casual and normal as possible, like I was greeting her after a regular day at work and not in the middle of orchestrating the most dramatic reveal since Bruce Willis found out he was dead in that one movie. "Thought I'd surprise you. You look beautiful, by the way. That dress is amazing." Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land and was trying to remember how lungs worked. "Danny," she finally managed to say, and her voice came out all strangled and weird, like someone was squeezing her throat. "What are you? How did you? When did you?" She couldn't finish a single sentence, which was fascinating because Charlotte was usually incredibly articulate. The woman could talk her way out of or into anything, but right now she was having a complete system failure. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. "Oh, I've been coming here for years," I said, still keeping that casual tone. "Since I was a kid, actually. My dad built this place, and when he died, he left it to me and my sister. You've met Sophia, right? She runs the day-to-day operations. I'm more of a silent partner. Well, usually silent. Tonight I decided to be a little less silent." The other women in Charlotte's circle had stopped their conversations now. They were all watching this unfold with the kind of fascinated horror that people usually reserve for car accidents or reality TV. One of them, I think her name was Jessica or Jennifer or something that started with J, had her phone out and was clearly trying to decide if this was important enough to text her other friends about. Spoiler alert, it definitely was. Richard, bless his heart, decided this was the perfect moment to make things even more complicated. Danny's being modest. He's not just a silent partner, he's a co-owner, equal stake with his sister. This entire establishment belongs to the Pierce family, and Danny here is carrying on his father's legacy. He turned to Marlene, "Which is actually why I wanted to catch you tonight. We're looking for a marketing consultant to help with our charity golf tournament in the spring, and I understand your firm specializes in event promotion." I watched Marlene's brain do this incredible gymnastics routine where she had to simultaneously process the fact that her employee's supposedly embarrassing husband was actually a valuable business connection while also trying to figure out how to capitalize on this information without looking like a complete opportunist. It was almost impressive in a depressing sort of way. "We do," Marlene said slowly, and I could see her switching gears from social mode to business mode. "I'd love to discuss that with you. Perhaps we could set up a meeting next week." She glanced at Charlotte, then back at me, then at Richard, clearly trying to piece together the dynamics of this situation. "That would be wonderful," Richard said. "Danny, you'll want to be there too, right? We should probably include both owners in the planning process." "Sure," I said, enjoying this way too much. "I can make time. Just let me know when, and I'll adjust my schedule. I've been pretty busy at the garage, but I can always move things around for club business." The garage. I emphasized those words just slightly, just enough to remind everyone, especially Charlotte, that I was still a mechanic. That hadn't changed. I still fixed trucks and got oil under my fingernails and wore t-shirts with holes in them. I just also happened to own a multi-million-dollar country club. Both things were true. Both things were me. Charlotte finally found her voice, though it sounded like it was coming from very far away. "This is my husband," she said to her friends, and the way she said husband made it sound like she was introducing a particularly exotic disease. "Danny, he fixes cars, and apparently owns this place." The silence that followed was so thick, so absolutely dense with awkwardness and shock and secondhand embarrassment, that you could have cut it with one of those fancy cheese knives they probably had in the kitchen. It was the kind of silence that makes you physically uncomfortable, where everyone's trying to figure out what to say, but nothing seems appropriate. So they just stand there hoping someone else will break first. I decided to be that someone. Yeah, I fix cars, I said. Grinning at Charlotte and her friends like this was the most natural conversation in the world. And I own this building. It's weird, right? It's like finding out your accountant is also a professional wrestler or your dentist moonlights as a stripper. People contain multitudes. I just contained slightly more multitudes than Charlotte expected. One of the women, definitely a Jessica, I was sure of it now, let out this nervous laugh that sounded like a hiccup mixed with a cough. Wow. That's quite a surprise. Right? I said. You should see Charlotte's face right now. It's like I just told her Santa isn't real, and also I am Santa, and I've been watching her the whole time, and she's definitely on the naughty list. Richard laughed at that, a big booming laugh that made several other people nearby turn to look at us. Danny's always had a sense of humor. Raymond was the same way, never took himself too seriously despite building an empire. It's a rare quality these days. Charlotte looked like she might throw up, pass out, or possibly spontaneously combust. Her face had gone through several color changes in the past 5 minutes, from normal to pale to red to a sort of grayish-green that suggested her body was having trouble deciding which physical reaction was most appropriate for this situation. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her wine glass, then seemed to think better of it, then reached for it again anyway, because she clearly needed something to do with her hands besides strangle me. Marlene was watching Charlotte with this expression that I couldn't quite read, but that definitely wasn't friendly. It was more like calculating, like she was reassessing her employees' value based on this new information. Charlotte had just gone from being a regular staff member to being the wife of someone who owned the country club, which potentially made her more valuable or more complicated. I wasn't sure which. Well, Marlene said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that people use when they're furious but can't show it. This certainly changes things, doesn't it? Charlotte, you dark horse, keeping secrets like this. We had no idea you were married to Danny Pierce. I didn't. Charlotte started, then stopped. What could she say? That she didn't know? That would make her look like an idiot. That she knew but didn't tell anyone? That would make her look like a liar. That she was embarrassed by her husband and deliberately kept him separate from her work life? That would make her look shallow and awful, which, to be fair, was pretty accurate, but not something she'd want to admit in front of her boss and colleagues. We like to keep our personal and professional lives separate, I said, throwing Charlotte a lifeline she absolutely didn't deserve, but that I gave her anyway, because I'm apparently a nicer person than she is. Charlotte's career is her own thing. I don't want anyone thinking she got where she is because of who she married. She's worked hard to build her reputation, and I respect that. It was complete and total BS, of course. Charlotte hadn't kept me separate from her work life to protect her professional reputation. She'd done it because she was embarrassed by me. But by framing it this way, I'd made her look principled instead of shallow, and I'd also made it impossible for her to contradict me without looking even worse. Charlotte stared at me with this mixture of gratitude and confusion and absolute terror, like she couldn't figure out if I was helping her or setting her up for an even bigger fall later. Smart woman. I wasn't entirely sure myself. That's very admirable, Marlene said, though her tone suggested she thought it was actually very stupid to not leverage every possible connection for professional gain. Well, Danny, it's been lovely meeting you properly. I look forward to that meeting about the golf tournament. Charlotte, we should probably discuss some things on Monday. That last sentence carried about 17 layers of subtext, none of them good for Charlotte. She nodded mutely, looking like she'd just been told she had a meeting with the principal and should probably bring a lawyer. The group started to disperse after that, the women drifting away to spread gossip to other parts of the club because that's what people do when they witness something juicy. Richard excused himself to go talk to someone about something important, leaving me and Charlotte standing there together in the middle of the country club that I owned and she worshipped, and the silence between us was somehow even more uncomfortable than the group's silence had been. We need to talk, Charlotte finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I agreed. We really do. Charlotte grabbed my arm with the kind of grip that suggested she was either trying to anchor herself to reality or preparing to physically drag me somewhere private where she could kill me without witnesses. Outside. Now, she hissed through clenched teeth, trying to maintain her composed public face while clearly having a complete internal meltdown. It was like watching someone try to hold a smile while their house burned down behind them. Can't, I said cheerfully, nodding toward the ballroom where people were starting to filter in. Silent auction's about to start. I promised Sophia I'd bid on some stuff this year. She says I never participate in club events, and she's not wrong, so I figured tonight's as good a night as any to get involved. You understand. The look Charlotte gave me could have melted steel. You promised Sophia, she repeated, her voice flat. Yep. Family. Gave me could have melted steel. You promised Sophia, she repeated, her voice flat. Yep. Family obligations, you know how it is. Plus, I heard they've got some pretty cool items up for grabs this year. Might find something worth bidding on. I gently extracted my arm from her death grip and started walking toward the ballroom, not bothering to check if she was following me. She was. Of course she was. Where else was she going to go? She couldn't leave. That would look like she was running away, and Charlotte's social survival instincts were way too strong for that. She couldn't make a scene. We were surrounded by her boss, her colleagues, and about 200 witnesses with smartphones. She was trapped, and we both knew it. The ballroom at Crown Ridge was another one of those spaces that my dad had gone completely overboard on. Crystal chandeliers, hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course, the whole 9 yards. Tonight it was set up for the monthly silent auction that the club ran to raise money for various charities. There were probably 50 items on display: weekend getaways, spa packages, golf lessons with some semi-famous pro, restaurant gift certificates, artwork, jewelry, the kind of stuff that rich people bid ridiculous amounts of money on so they can feel good about themselves while also getting something tangible out of their charitable donation. I grabbed a bid sheet and a pen from one of the tables near the entrance. Charlotte was right behind me, practically vibrating with suppressed rage and confusion and probably about 12 other emotions I couldn't identify and didn't really care to try. Danny, she said, her voice low and urgent. We need to talk about this. About everything. You can't just... Oh, look at this, I interrupted, stopping in front of a display for a week-long ski trip to Aspen. Aspen in February. That could be fun. Have you ever been skiing, Charlotte? I haven't. Always seemed like the kind of thing rich people do, but I guess technically I qualify now, so might as well embrace it, right? I wrote down my bid. $15,000. Which was absolutely insane for a ski trip I had zero intention of actually taking. But the current high bid was $12,000, and I wanted to make a statement. Plus, the look on Charlotte's face when she saw what I'd written was worth every penny. Are you insane? She whispered, staring at the bid sheet like I'd just written my bid in blood. $15,000 for a ski trip? It's for charity, Charlotte. Don't you care about charity? I moved to the next item, a wine-tasting tour of Napa Valley. Current high bid, $8,000. I wrote down 10. Plus, I can afford it. Turns out owning a country club pays pretty well. Who knew? My phone started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Charlotte's name on the screen. A text message, even though she was standing literally 3 feet away from me. I looked at her, then at my phone, then back at her. Really? I said. You're texting me? I'm right here. Read it, she said. Her jaw clenched so tight I was surprised her teeth didn't crack. I opened the message. This isn't funny. Short, simple, to the point. Very Charlotte. I disagree, I said, typing out a response while she watched. I think it's hilarious. I hit send and watched her phone light up in her clutch. She typed back furiously. Another message appeared on my screen. You lied to me. I laughed out loud at that one, which made several nearby people turn to look at us. I lied to you, I said, not bothering to lower my voice anymore. Charlotte, I told you I was a mechanic. That's not a lie. I am a mechanic. I fix trucks. I get oil under my fingernails. I wear t-shirts with holes in them. All of that is true. I just didn't tell you about the side hustle of owning your second home. That's not lying. That's called selective information sharing. It's different. Meet me outside now, her next text said, with the now in all caps like that would somehow make me more likely to comply. I ignored it. Instead, I walked over to a display featuring a weekend at some fancy spa resort that promised hot stone massages and seaweed wraps and all sorts of other treatments that sounded vaguely medieval, but apparently cost a fortune. The current high bid was 6,000. I wrote down 8. Charlotte made a strangled noise behind me. Are you trying to bankrupt yourself out of spite? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Can't bankrupt myself when I own a country club? I pointed out. That's kind of the beauty of having multiple income streams. The garage brings in decent money. The club brings in excellent money. And together they make it so I can spend 8 grand on a spa weekend I'll never use without even checking my bank balance. It's liberating, honestly. You should try it sometime. More buzzing from my phone. I didn't even look at it this time. I just kept walking from display to display, writing down increasingly ridiculous bids on items I had absolutely no interest in actually winning. A golf club membership at some exclusive course in Scotland, 20,000. A private dinner for 6 prepared by a celebrity chef, 12,000. A weekend sailing trip in the Caribbean, 18,000. Every bid was higher than the last. Every bid was completely unnecessary, and every bid made Charlotte look more and more like she was about to have an aneurysm. The thing is, I wasn't doing this just to mess with Charlotte, although that was definitely a pleasant side effect. I was doing it because I'd spent 3 years hiding who I was, downplaying my success, making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. And I was done with that. Done pretending that I was less than I actually was. Done apologizing for fixing trucks when I could have been doing nothing and living off my inheritance. Done feeling embarrassed about being myself. If Charlotte wanted to be part of a world where money and status and country club memberships defined a person's worth, fine. But she was going to have to reconcile that with the fact that her embarrassing mechanic husband actually belonged in this world more than she did. I was born into it. I literally owned part of it. And she was just visiting on borrowed credibility. I found Richard near the back of the ballroom, examining what looked like a vintage watch under one of those little magnifying glasses that jewelers use. He looked up when I approached and grinned. Getting into the spirit of things, I see. I noticed some of your bids. Very generous. Figure it's time I started acting like an owner instead of just cashing the checks, I said. Your father would be proud, Richard said, and something about the way he said it made me think he actually meant it. He always wanted you and Sophia to take this place seriously. Sophia does, obviously. Girl's got business running through her veins. But you, Danny, you always seemed more interested in engines than entertainment. Still am, I admitted. But sometimes you've got to show up for the things that matter, even if they're not your favorite things. Dad taught me that too. Richard nodded approvingly, then glanced over my shoulder to where Charlotte was standing about 10 feet away, still clutching her phone like it was a life preserver. Your wife seems distressed. Everything all right there? Define all right, I said. She's surprised. I'm amused. It's a whole thing. We'll work it out. Or we won't. Either way, life goes on. Well, if you need any advice, and I'm not saying you do, but if you do, call me. I've been married for 43 years. I know a thing or two about navigating rough waters. He clapped me on the shoulder and moved on to examine another auction item, leaving me standing there thinking about what navigating rough waters meant when the waters in question were more like a Category 5 hurricane. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Charlotte had apparently given up on subtlety and was now just rage texting me every thought that entered her head. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through them. This is humiliating. Everyone is staring at us. You're making me look like an idiot. Why didn't you tell me? How could you keep this from me? We need to talk immediately. I pocketed my phone without responding to any of them. Instead, I walked over to where Marlene was examining a piece of abstract art that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and then charged 20 grand for it. Her husband was with her, a guy named Todd or Tom or something equally forgettable who did something in finance and had the personality of lukewarm oatmeal. Marlene, I said, and she turned around with that professional smile that she probably practiced in the mirror. I wanted to ask you about something. Your husband collects classic cars, right? Charlotte mentioned that once. Tom or Todd's face lit up like I'd just offered him free money. I do. How did you know? Charlotte talks about work sometimes. I lied smoothly. Charlotte never talked about work at home because she was too busy avoiding me. I'm actually working on restoring a 1967 Mustang right now. Boss 302. Found it in a barn upstate. Total rust bucket, but the bones are good. It's been a passion project for about 2 years now. And just like that, I was in. Tom or Todd started talking about compression ratios and carburetor specs and all the other technical stuff that car guys love to discuss, and I jumped right in because this was my element. This was what I was actually good at. Not small talk about wine pairings or stock portfolios or whatever else people discussed at country clubs. Cars. Engines. The satisfaction of taking something broken and making it work again. Marlene watched this interaction with interest, and I could see her mental file on me getting updated in real time. Rich enough to own a country club, but still liked getting his hands dirty. Approachable. Knowledgeable about things her husband cared about. Potentially useful for networking and social climbing. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. You should come by my garage sometime, I told Tom or Todd. Check out the Mustang. I'd love to get your opinion on some of the restoration choices I'm making. Charlotte knows where it is. She's dropped me off there a few times. Another lie, but whatever. Nobody was fact-checking me. I'd love that, Tom or Todd said enthusiastically. Are you open next Saturday? For you? Absolutely. Bring coffee, and I'll give you the full tour. Marlene looked pleased, like I'd just done something that benefited her somehow, which I probably had, because now her husband was happy, and that made her life easier. That's very generous of you, Danny. Charlotte's lucky to have such an accommodating husband. Oh, I'm the lucky one, I said, catching Charlotte's eye across the room. She was still standing there, still looking like she wanted to murder me, still clutching that phone like it might suddenly provide answers to all her questions. Trust me, I'm very, very lucky. The auction started winding down around 10 o'clock. I'd bid on 8 different items, spending a total of about $92,000 on stuff I'd never use, and I regretted exactly none of it. The money was going to charity, I could afford it, and most importantly, I'd made my point. I wasn't the embarrassing mechanic husband anymore. I was Danny Pierce, co-owner of Crown Ridge Country Club, and everyone here now knew it. Charlotte didn't say a word to me for the rest of the night. She just watched me from various distances, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Anger, confusion, betrayal, fear, calculation. I could see her trying to figure out her next move, trying to decide if she should be furious with me for deceiving her or if she should pivot and try to leverage this new information to her advantage. I didn't stick around to find out which path she'd choose. Around 10:30, I told Richard I was heading out, said goodbye to Gerald and a few other staff members, and walked out to the front where Marcus brought my truck around. The same rusty F-250 that Charlotte hated, that she said ruined her aesthetic, that she'd begged me to get rid of for 2 years. I climbed in, started the engine. It turned over on the first try because I maintained my vehicles like a responsible adult, and drove home, leaving Charlotte at the country club with her boss and her friends and her shattered illusions. My phone didn't stop buzzing the entire drive home. I didn't answer a single message. I got home around 11:15 and immediately did what any reasonable person would do after dropping a tactical nuke on their marriage. I made myself a sandwich. Turkey, Swiss cheese, lettuce, tomato, mayo, the whole 9 yards. I even toasted the bread, because if your life is falling apart you might as well have good bread. I was sitting at the kitchen table, halfway through this magnificent creation and watching highlights from a football game I'd recorded earlier, when I heard Charlotte's BMW screech into the driveway, like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious. Country Club drift. The front door slammed open so hard I'm pretty sure the hinges bent. I didn't even look up from my sandwich. Just kept chewing, watching some guy I'd never heard of score a touchdown while the announcers lost their minds about it like he'd just cured cancer instead of running with a ball. Charlotte appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, still wearing that $900 dress that now looked slightly disheveled, like she'd been through some kind of emotional war zone. Which, to be fair, she had. Her makeup was smudged, she'd been crying, probably in the car on the way home, and her hair wasn't quite as perfect as it had been earlier. She looked like a before and after photo of a mental breakdown, except both photos were the after. Really? She said, her voice hitting that particular frequency that dogs probably hate. You're eating a sandwich? I just had the most humiliating experience of my entire life, and you're sitting here eating a fucking sandwich. Turkey and Swiss, I said, holding it up like I was in a commercial. Want one? I made extra turkey bacon. It's the good kind, from that fancy store you like. She made a noise that wasn't quite a scream, but wasn't quite words either. More like the sound a kettle makes right before it explodes. Then she started pacing back and forth across the kitchen like she was trying to wear a hole in the floor. You deceived me, she said, and her voice cracked on that last word. You lied to me for 3 years, Danny. 3 years. How could you do that? I set down my sandwich and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd walked in. She looked genuinely upset. Not angry upset, but hurt upset. Like she actually believed she was the victim in this situation. It was almost impressive, in a delusional sort of way. I deceived you, I said, and I couldn't keep the laugh out of my voice. Charlotte, I told you I was a mechanic. That's still true. I fix trucks. I get dirty. I work with my hands. None of that was a lie. I just didn't tell you about the side hustle of owning your second home. You know, the country club you worship. The one where you spend every Saturday pretending to be someone important. That's not the same thing, and you know it. She stopped pacing and faced me, her hands balled into fists at her sides. You deliberately let me believe you were just a mechanic. You let me think we were struggling financially. You let me. She stopped, probably realizing that finishing that sentence would make her sound even worse than she already did. You let me what? I prompted, leaning back in my chair. Go ahead. Finish that thought. You let me what? Be embarrassed by you? Look down on you? Tell you that you weren't good enough to meet my wealthy friends? Oh wait, that was you doing that to me. My bad. I get confused sometimes about who the actual victim is in this scenario. Her face flushed red. That's not fair. You know what's not fair, Charlotte? Being married to someone for 3 years and having them treat you like you're an embarrassment. Like you're not good enough. Like you're some kind of social liability they have to hide from their real life. I stood up, leaving my sandwich on the table. You want to talk about deception? Let's talk about how you've been lying to me for 3 years about who you actually are. You pretended to be this down-to-earth person who didn't care about money or status. You said you loved me for me, not for what I could give you. But that was all bullshit, wasn't it? You were just slumming it, dating the mechanic, thinking you could change me into someone more appropriate for your social circle. That's not. I never. She struggled to find words, tears starting to stream down her face, which would have made me feel bad except I was way past the point of caring about her tears. I do love you. I wanted you to have ambition, to want more than just fixing trucks for the rest of your life. I own a multi-million-dollar country club. I practically shouted, surprising both of us with the volume. How much more ambition do you need? What do I have to do to be enough for you? Build a second country club? Buy a yacht? Run for president? What's the magic number here, Charlotte? She wiped at her tears, smearing her mascara even more. You should have told me. We're married. Married people don't keep secrets like that. Oh, we don't. I walked past her into the living room, heading for the stairs. That's interesting, because you've got about $8,000 worth of charges on our credit card from the past month that I'm pretty sure you didn't mention to me. New clothes, fancy dinners with your friends, that purse you bought last week that cost more than most people's rent. But sure, let's talk about secrets and honesty. She followed me up the stairs, practically running to keep up. That's different. That's just shopping. That's not the same as hiding your entire financial situation from your wife. I stopped at the top of the stairs and turned to face her. You're right. It's not the same. What I did was wait to see if you'd love me for who I am instead of what I have. What you did was spend my money while telling me I wasn't good enough. One of those things is a test of character. The other one is just being a shitty person. That stopped her cold. She stood there on the stairs, looking up at me with this expression like I'd just slapped her. You think I'm a shitty person? I think you're someone who got so caught up in appearances and social climbing that you forgot what actually matters, I said, softer now, because I was getting tired of yelling. I think you're someone who would have been perfectly happy with me if I'd been rich from the start, but because you thought I was poor, you treated me like I was less than. And that's not love, Charlotte. That's conditional acceptance. There's a difference. She was full-on crying now, the ugly kind of crying where your whole face scrunches up and you can't really breathe right. So what do you want me to do? Apologize? Beg for forgiveness? Tell you I was wrong? I want you to take off the ring. Silence. Complete, total, absolute silence. Like someone had hit the mute button on the entire universe. Charlotte stared at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. What? She whispered. The ring. Your wedding ring. I want you to take it off. Put it on the counter. We're done. You can't be serious. She grabbed onto the stair railing like she might fall over. Danny, come on. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can. Work through what exactly? The fact that you're fundamentally embarrassed by who I am? The fact that you value money and status more than you value me? Charlotte, we don't have a communication problem or a trust issue or whatever other marriage counseling buzzwords you want to throw at this. We have a fundamental incompatibility problem. You want someone who's going to help you climb the social ladder. I want someone who doesn't think there's a ladder to begin with. She tried a different approach, switching from tears to that soft, pleading voice she used when she wanted something. Danny, please. I made a mistake. I said something I shouldn't have said, but we've been together for 3 years. We have a history. We have a life together. You can't just throw that away because of one comment. One comment. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Charlotte, that wasn't one comment. That was 3 years of comments. 3 years of subtle digs and suggestions and disappointed looks every time I showed up somewhere in my work clothes. 3 years of you trying to change me into someone I'm not. That one comment about being too embarrassing to introduce to your friends? That was just the first time you said it out loud. You've been thinking it our entire marriage. That's not true. Take off the ring, Charlotte. She did, eventually, but not before trying about 17 different tactics to change my mind. She cried more. She got angry and yelled about how I'd wasted her time. She tried the soft approach again, touching my arm and talking about all the good times we'd had. She even tried bargaining, saying she'd change, she'd be different, she'd never complain about my job again. But when none of that worked, when she finally realized I was serious, she yanked off her wedding ring and threw it at me. Not handed it to me like a mature adult. Threw it, like a baseball pitcher going for a strikeout. It bounced off my chest and clattered onto the hardwood floor, spinning in a little circle before coming to rest near the baseboard. Fine, she screamed. Fine. You want a divorce? You've got one. But you're going to regret this, Danny. You're going to regret throwing away our marriage because your ego couldn't handle one tiny comment. My ego. I bent down to pick up the ring, examining it in the dim hallway light. It was a nice ring. I'd spent 2 months' salary on it back when I was still pretending to be just a mechanic with modest means. Charlotte, this has nothing to do with ego. This has to do with self-respect. Something you apparently don't think I deserve to have. She was still yelling, something about her parents, about the wedding deposit they'd lost, about the plane tickets they'd bought to visit next month. I stopped listening. Just walked into our bedroom, my bedroom now, I guess, and closed the door. Locked it, even though I knew that would just make her angrier. Through the door, I could hear her having what sounded like a complete meltdown. Screaming, crying, throwing things. At one point, I heard something shatter, probably the ugly vase her mother had given us that I'd always hated anyway. And I didn't even flinch. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her wedding ring, and pulled out my phone. Scrolled through all the angry texts she'd sent earlier that I'd ignored. Read through them one by one. And you know what? Not a single one was about our relationship or our marriage or anything that actually mattered. They were all about her image, her reputation, how this made her look. Not once did she text, I love you, or let's talk about this, or I'm sorry for hurting you. It was all, this is humiliating, and everyone is staring, and you made me look like an idiot. And that, right there, told me everything I needed to know. I texted my sister, hey, you up? Might need a lawyer recommendation. Sooner rather than later. Sophia's response came back within 30 seconds. Finally. I have 3 names. Sending now. Also, you can stay at my place if you need to. Also, I'm proud of you. I smiled at that. At least someone was proud of me. Even if it was just for having enough self-respect to walk away from someone who didn't value me. Charlotte was still making noise downstairs. Slamming cabinets, probably. Looking for wine or chocolate or whatever it is that people consume during emotional crises. I didn't go check on her. Didn't try to comfort her or make sure she was okay. For the first time in 3 years, Charlotte's emotional state wasn't my responsibility anymore. And honestly, it felt pretty damn good. I woke up the next morning to the sound of someone leaning on my doorbell like they were trying to send a message in Morse code. Aggressive, insistent, and completely lacking in any sense of boundaries or basic human decency. Which meant it could only be one person. Patricia Westfield, Charlotte's mother, coming to fix her daughter's broken marriage through sheer force of will and expensive perfume. I checked my phone. 7:43 in the morning. On a Sunday. These people had no respect for the sanctity of sleeping in after your wife throws her wedding ring at your chest and has a meltdown that probably registered on the Richter scale. The doorbell kept ringing. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." A gift from my sister that Charlotte had always hated, which made me love it even more, and trudged downstairs. Charlotte was nowhere to be seen. Probably locked herself in the guest room after exhausting herself with last night's tantrum. I opened the door to find Patricia standing there in full battle regalia. Designer pantsuit, perfectly styled hair that probably required an engineering degree to achieve, makeup that looked professionally applied even though it was barely 8 in the morning, and an expression that suggested she'd come to negotiate a hostage situation and wasn't leaving without results. "Danny," she said, pushing past me into my house without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about this situation with Charlotte." "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said, closing the door and following her into the living room. "Can I get you some coffee?" Arsenic. A reality check. She ignored that, standing in the middle of my living room with her arms crossed like a disappointed principal. Patricia Westfield was in her mid-50s but looked 40 thanks to what I assumed was a combination of good genes, expensive skincare, and possibly a deal with the devil. She'd never liked me. I wasn't wealthy enough, connected enough, ambitious enough for her precious daughter, but she'd tolerated me because Charlotte had insisted. Now that the marriage was imploding, she probably saw this as her chance to finally say all the things she'd been holding back for 3 years. "Charlotte called me last night," she said, her voice doing that thing where it's technically calm, but you can hear the judgment underneath. She was hysterical, absolutely beside herself. "She said you're divorcing her." "Yep," I confirmed, sitting down on the couch because I wasn't going to have this conversation standing up like I was on trial. "That's the plan." Over one tiny comment. "Danny, don't you think you're being a bit dramatic?" I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, which clearly wasn't the response Patricia was expecting based on the way her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. A tiny comment. "Patricia, your daughter told me I was too embarrassing to introduce to her wealthy friends." That's not a tiny comment. That's a summary statement of how she views our entire relationship. "She made a mistake," Patricia said, and I could tell she was trying to sound reasonable, like we were negotiating a business deal instead of discussing the end of my marriage. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. Surely you understand that. Marriage requires forgiveness, Danny. It requires working through difficulties. "You're right," I said. "Marriage does require those things. It also requires basic respect and not treating your spouse like they're a social liability." Charlotte failed that particular requirement pretty spectacularly. Patricia's expression hardened. "My daughter has worked very hard to build her career and her social standing. She has aspirations, Danny, goals. She needs a partner who can support those ambitions, not someone who's content to spend his life in a garage covered in grease." And there it was. The real issue. Not Charlotte's comment, not my hurt feelings, but the fact that I didn't fit into their vision of what success looked like. "Here's the thing, Patricia," I said, leaning forward. "I do spend my life in a garage covered in grease. But I also own Crown Ridge Country Club. You know, that place where Charlotte spends every Saturday pretending she's better than everyone else. Yeah, that's mine. Well, mine and my sister's. My dad built it, left it to us when he died. So Charlotte's been embarrassed by a guy who's probably richer than 90% of her wealthy friends." Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes. "You what? Own the country club. Co-own, technically, but let's not split hairs. The point is, your daughter has been treating me like I'm not good enough for her while standing in a building that literally belongs to me. It's almost poetic, really. Tragic, but poetic." She sat down, which I took as a sign that this information had successfully penetrated her carefully maintained composure. "Charlotte didn't know?" "Nope. I never told her. Wanted to see if she'd love me for me instead of my bank account. Turns out the answer was no. But hey, at least now I know." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her brain working, recalculating, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation now that the facts had changed. "This changes things," she finally said. "Does it though?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it just proves my point. You and Charlotte both think I'm more valuable now that you know I'm rich. But I'm the same person I was yesterday. The same person I've been for 3 years. The only thing that changed is your awareness of my net worth. And if that's what makes me acceptable to you people, then I don't want to be acceptable." "Don't be ridiculous," Patricia said, switching tactics. Of course, it's not just about money. But you have to understand, Danny, you deceived Charlotte. You let her believe you were something you weren't. I am a mechanic, Patricia. That part was never a lie. But you're also wealthy. That's relevant information for a spouse to have. Why? I stood up, done with this conversation. So she could spend even more of my money? So she could brag to her friends? So she could feel better about being married to me because at least I had a good bank account to make up for my embarrassing career choice? No thanks. I'm good. Patricia stood too, smoothing down her pantsuit like that would somehow give her back control of the situation. Charlotte's willing to forgive you for this deception. She's willing to move past it. She thinks counseling could help. And I agree. This is salvageable, Danny, if you're both willing to work on it. Tell Charlotte I said thanks, but no thanks, I said, walking toward the front door to show Patricia out. She can keep the BMW. I co-signed for it anyway. She can keep her clothes and her jewelry and whatever else she wants from the house. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork. But we're done, Patricia. Tell your daughter she's bankrupt. Excuse me. She invested in the wrong stock, I explained, opening the front door. She put all her chips on a guy she thought was just a mechanic, planned to trade up eventually. And now she's realizing that the mechanic was actually the jackpot she was looking for. But it's too late. The market closed. She's bankrupt. And I'm not a bank that does bailouts. Patricia stared at me like I'd grown a second head, then turned and walked to her Mercedes without another word, her heels clicking angrily against the driveway. She peeled out like her daughter had the night before. Apparently dramatic exits ran in the family, and I closed the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Mom just called. Said you were incredibly rude to Charlotte's mother. I'm so proud I might cry. Brunch. I smiled and typed back. You're buying. I just survived a visit from the Dragon Lady. I deserve pancakes. Deal. 1 hour. And Danny? Dad would be proud too. Yeah, I thought he would be. By Tuesday, things had escalated from mildly concerning to someone needs to call a wellness check levels of crazy. Charlotte had apparently decided that if she couldn't book the ballroom legitimately, she'd just show up and claim it was already reserved. She arrived at the club at 2 in the afternoon with a wedding planner, a florist, and enough audacity to fill a cargo ship. Gerald called me directly this time. Mr. Pierce, your wife, sorry, your soon-to-be ex-wife, is in the lobby insisting she has a reservation for Saturday. She's brought vendors. There are flower arrangements. I don't know what to do. Tell her she's trespassing, I said. Her membership was revoked yesterday. She has no legal right to be there. I tried that. She said you're bluffing. She said you wouldn't dare embarrass her in front of the vendors. I laughed. Watch me. I drove to the club in record time, still wearing my work clothes because I'd been in the middle of replacing a transmission when Gerald called. When I walked into the lobby, Charlotte was there in full wedding planning mode, gesturing at different areas while some poor florist took notes and tried to look enthusiastic. Charlotte, I said, and she spun around so fast her hair whipped dramatically like she was in a shampoo commercial. Danny, perfect timing. I was just finalizing the floral arrangements for Saturday. I'm thinking white roses with gold accents to match. You need to leave. She blinked. Excuse me. You're not a member here anymore. Your membership was revoked. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out. Her face went red. You can't do that. I literally own this building, Charlotte. I absolutely can do that. And I am doing that. Right now? Leave. That's when things got really interesting. The pregnancy claim lasted exactly 48 hours before Charlotte's own mother called me to apologize and confirm that her daughter was, in fact, not pregnant and had apparently suffered some kind of stress-induced psychotic episode. Patricia actually sounded embarrassed, which I didn't think was possible for a woman who once told me my truck lowered property values just by existing in the same zip code. She's seeing a therapist, Patricia said stiffly. And she's agreed to sign whatever divorce papers your attorney sends over. I'm sorry, Danny, for everything. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from that family, so I took it. The TikTok video of Charlotte's tennis court meltdown went viral. Like, actually viral. 2 million views in 3 days. The caption someone had added, "Gold digger meets plot twist," became a whole meme format. People were making reaction videos, doing voiceovers, creating remix versions with different music. My personal favorite was the one where someone edited in the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song right when security arrived. Charlotte deleted all her social media accounts by the following Monday. Last I heard through the extremely efficient gossip network that is suburban country club culture, she'd moved back in with her parents and was selling essential oils on some multi-level marketing scheme. She'd also started posting inspirational quotes on a new Instagram account about knowing your worth and rising above toxic people, which was rich coming from someone who'd spent 3 years telling me I wasn't worth introducing to her friends. Meanwhile, my life got exponentially better.